Ever seen someone destroy a pool out of pure spite? Wait till you see what happened next. Thomas Walsh wiped the sweat from his brow as he adjusted the pH levels of his backyard pool. The sparkling blue water reflected the cloudless summer sky, a sight that never failed to fill him with pride. 7 years of mortgage payments, careful landscaping, and weekend maintenance had transformed the once barren yard into an oasis for his family and the entire neighborhood. "Dad, can Jason and Emma come over to swim after lunch?" 12-year-old Lily bounded into the yard, her younger brother Max trailing behind her with hopeful eyes. "Sure thing, kiddo. Tell their parents we'll have the grill going around 5 if they want to join." Thomas ruffled Max's hair. These spontaneous gatherings had become a cherished tradition on Willow Lane. The Walsh pool that hosted everything from birthday parties to graduation celebrations, becoming the unofficial community center of their close-knit suburban neighborhood. Sarah, Thomas's wife of 15 years, appeared at the patio door with a glass of lemonade. "Have you seen the moving truck next door? Looks like we finally have new neighbors." The house adjacent to theirs had stood empty for nearly 4 months after the Hendersons relocated to Florida. It was a handsome colonial, slightly smaller than the Walsh home, but with a meticulously maintained front yard. "I thought I heard some commotion earlier," Thomas said, accepting the cold drink gratefully. "Any sign of them yet?" As if on cue, a silver Mercedes SUV pulled into the driveway next door. A woman in her mid-40s emerged, her platinum blonde hair cut in a sharp bob. She wore designer sunglasses and a beige pantsuit despite the summer heat, surveying her new property with hands on her hips. "Should we go introduce ourselves?" Sarah suggested. Thomas nodded. Neighborly relations were important to him. He believed good fences made good neighbors, but friendly conversations made even better ones. 20 minutes later, they stood on the immaculate porch of the Colonial, a homemade lasagna in Sarah's hands. The doorbell chimed pleasantly inside. The woman who answered wore a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes?" she asked, her gaze flicking between Thomas and Sarah before settling on the dish. "Welcome to Willow Lane. We're the Walshes from next door," Thomas said warmly. "I'm Thomas, this is my wife Sarah, and our kids Lily and Max are around somewhere. We thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal after a day of moving." The woman's posture relaxed slightly. "Karen Mitchell," she replied, accepting the lasagna. "Just me moving in. I'm downsizing after my divorce." She emphasized the last word with a hint of bitterness. "Well, we're glad to have you in the neighborhood," Sarah said. "If you need anything at all, we're just a few steps away." Karen's eyes drifted past them to the visible corner of their backyard. "Is that a pool I glimpsed?" Thomas nodded proudly. "Our little backyard project. Took us 3 summers to save up for it, but it's been worth every penny. You're welcome to join us anytime for a swim." Something flickered across Karen's face, an emotion Thomas couldn't quite place. Envy, perhaps, or calculation. "How?" "Communal," Karen said. She disappeared briefly into the house, returning without the lasagna but with a small potted plant and a folded paper. "A housewarming gift for myself and some neighborhood suggestions I've already compiled." Thomas accepted the plant, a small cactus, while Sarah unfolded the paper. It contained a neatly typed list of community standards Karen expected to be maintained, from trash can placement to acceptable hours for lawn mowing. "I'm very particular about my environment," Karen explained, her smile now resembling something more predatory than friendly. "I'm sure we'll get along splendidly as long as everyone respects appropriate boundaries." Later that evening, as Thomas and Sarah prepared dinner, they shared a laugh over Karen's suggestions. "Did you see number 7? Sarah giggled. "No wind chimes of any kind permitted within audible distance of neighboring properties." "She's just settling in," Thomas said charitably. "Probably nervous about starting fresh after a divorce. I'm sure she'll loosen up once she gets to know everyone." How wrong he would prove to be. 2 weeks after Karen moved in, the Walsh family began preparations for Lily's 10th birthday party. Thomas hung colorful streamers from the patio awning while Sarah arranged platters of finger foods on the outdoor table. Max helped by blowing up balloons, his cheeks puffing with determined effort. "How many kids are coming again?" Thomas asked as he balanced on his platter. 19 from Lily's class, plus a few from her soccer team, Sarah replied, counting out paper plates in bright rainbow colors. "I told parents they're welcome to stay or drop off, whatever works for them." Thomas nodded, mentally calculating the pool capacity. Their backyard could comfortably accommodate 30 people, and he'd applied for the proper noise permit from the city last week, a precaution he always took for larger gatherings after a misunderstanding with a different neighbor years ago. By 2 o'clock, the backyard hummed with activity. Children splashed in the pool under Thomas's watchful eye, while parents chatted in small groups around the yard. Lily wore a plastic tiara as she orchestrated a game of Marco Polo, her laughter carrying across the water. Thomas noticed Karen's curtains twitching throughout the afternoon. He had invited her with a handwritten note in her mailbox, but received no response, just as they were serving the birthday cake. A masterpiece of blue frosting designed to look like ocean waves, the gate to their backyard swung open. Karen Mitchell strode across the patio like a prosecutor approaching a witness stand. She wore pressed khaki capras and a polo shirt buttoned to the neck despite the 80-degree heat. The conversations around her faltered as parents sensed the sudden tension. "Excuse me," Karen announced loudly, not bothering the pleasantries. "It's exactly 4:30, and this noise has been going on for over 2 hours now." Thomas handed the cake server to Sarah and stepped forward with a placating smile. "Hi, Karen. Would you like a piece of cake? We invited you to join us." "But I'm not interested in cake," Karen interrupted. "I'm interested in peace and quiet on a Saturday afternoon." The shrieking has been nonstop, and I can hear that awful pop music from inside my home office with the windows closed. Several parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. The music playing from Thomas's wireless speakers was barely audible over the normal sounds of children playing. "I understand it's a bit lively," Thomas said calmly, aware of the many eyes watching this exchange. "We're celebrating Lily's birthday, and we'll be wrapping up by 7. I made sure to get the proper permits from the city for the gathering." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Permits don't change the fact that this is disruptive to the neighborhood." One of the other parents stepped forward. "I've lived across the street for 5 years, and the Walsh parties are always respectful. They're an important part of our community." Karen turned to the woman with a cold smile. "And you are?" "Rebecca Chen, HOA president," the woman replied evenly. Something in Karen's expression shifted, but she recovered quickly. "Well, even if HOA presidents should care about maintaining property values and neighborhood tranquility." She turned back to Thomas. "We'll see about these permits you claim to have." With that, she pivoted on her heel and marched back toward the gate. Every adult in the yard watched her retreat, a collective breath held until she disappeared from view. "Sorry about that," Thomas said to the gathering, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. Rebecca approached him with a reassuring pat on his arm. "Don't worry about it. New neighbors sometimes take time to adjust to community norms." The party resumed, though the subdued quality that hadn't been there before. Thomas tried to focus on Lily's enjoyment rather than the sour feeling in his stomach. The next morning, an official noise complaint notice from the city was taped to his front door. When Thomas called the number listed, the clerk informed him this was the first of many calls they had received yesterday afternoon, all from the same telephone number. The weeks following Lily's birthday party brought a steady escalation in Karen's campaign against the Walsh family. Thomas first noticed the pattern when a city inspector arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand. "We've received an anonymous complaint about possible code violations with your pool," the inspector explained apologetically. He seemed embarrassed to be there. "Something about improper drainage and fence height requirements." Thomas took the day off work to accompany the inspector around his property. The pool passed inspection easily. Thomas had been meticulous about following every regulation during installation. "Between us," the inspector said quietly as he prepared to leave, "we've been getting a lot of calls about this property. All from the same person, I'd wager." 3 days later, Thomas received a certified letter from the Homeowners Association. Someone had filed a formal complaint about the unauthorized blue tone of his fence. The letter included close-up photographs of the paint clearly taken from Karen's yard. The complaint was ultimately dismissed when Thomas provided receipts showing the color had been pre-approved 4 years earlier. "This is getting ridiculous," Sarah said one evening as they sorted through a new batch of official-looking envelopes. "She's reported our trash cans for being visible from the street on trash day. And now there's something about our trees overhanging her property by 3 inches. Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples. "I tried to talk to her yesterday. She shut the door in my face." "Dad," Max called from the backyard, his voice pitched with alarm. Someone threw a bunch of stuff in the pool. Thomas rushed outside to find grocery store circulars, fast food wrappers, and other debris floating in his meticulously maintained pool. From the pattern of the litter, it was clear it hadn't blown in naturally. Someone had deliberately scattered it across the water. That night, Thomas installed security cameras covering the pool area and the boundaries shared with Karen's property. Sarah thought it was excessive until Thomas woke her at 2 in the morning. "You need to see this," he whispered, pointing to his phone screen. The night vision footage showed Karen clearly identifiable despite her attempt to disguise herself with a hoodie, carefully unlatching their pool gate before creeping away. Had Thomas not double-checked the lock before bed, their children might have wandered into an unsecured pool area the next morning. "That's it," Sarah said, her face pale. "That's not just being a bad neighbor. That's endangering our kids." The next day, Thomas approached Karen's house with the security footage queued on his phone. When she answered the door, her expression was one of practiced innocence. "What is the meaning of this?" Thomas asked, turning the screen toward her. You unlocked our pool gate at 2 in the morning. Do you understand how dangerous that is?" Karen's face hardened as she recognized herself in the grainy footage. "I have no idea what you're talking about. That could be anyone. And how dare you install cameras pointing at my property? I'll be speaking to my attorney about this invasion of privacy." "The cameras point at my property," Thomas clarified, his patience finally wearing thin. "And if you come near our pool again, I'll be speaking to the police, not the HOA." Something dark flashed across Karen's face. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I've handled people like you before. That pool is a nuisance, and one way or another, it won't be a problem much longer." The door slammed with such force that Thomas felt the vibration in his bones. As he walked back to his house, he noticed a small garden gnome positioned at the edge of Karen's property, its painted face grinning malevolently in his direction. Its arm had been positioned to point directly at the Walsh family's backyard. Thomas was trimming hedges on a Saturday morning when a white van with Precision Surveys Incorporated emblazoned on the side pulled into Karen's driveway. Two men in khaki uniforms emerged with tripods and measuring equipment, nodding curtly toward Karen, who stood on her porch with arms crossed. One of the men consulted a clipboard before pointing toward the property line between the two houses. "Morning," Thomas called, trying to maintain some semblance of neighborly relations despite everything. The surveyors acknowledged him with uncomfortable glances but quickly returned to their work under Karen's watchful eye. For hours, the men took measurements along the boundary line, paying particular attention to the area near Thomas's pool deck. Thomas tried to focus on his yard work, but an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. When the surveyors finally packed up their equipment, Karen's triumphant smile told him everything he needed to know. 3 days later, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the Walsh home. Inside was a formal legal notice claiming that Thomas's pool deck extended exactly 3.7 inches onto Karen's property. The document demanded immediate removal of the encroaching structure and included a survey report with official-looking stamps and signatures. "This is absurd," Sarah said, scanning the paperwork. "We had our own survey done before installing the pool. The property line is clearly marked by the fence posts." Thomas pulled out their home improvement files and found their original survey from 5 years prior. The boundary lines were clearly marked, showing their pool deck safely within their property by nearly a foot. The next day, Thomas contacted his homeowner's insurance company, who referred him to a real estate attorney. The consultation fee alone was $350, the first of many expenses to come. "Unfortunately, this isn't uncommon," the attorney explained after reviewing both surveys. "Your neighbor has commissioned what we call an aggressive survey. They've interpreted boundary markers in the most favorable way possible for their client. It won't hold up in court, but defending against it will be costly. So we just have to pay to prove we're right?" Thomas asked incredulously. "Welcome to property law," the attorney replied with a sympathetic grimace. "I suggest a boundary line agreement to settle this once and for all, but based on what you've told me about your neighbor. She won't agree to anything reasonable," Thomas finished. That evening, as the Walsh family ate dinner on their patio, the unmistakable sound of furniture being dragged across concrete came from Karen's yard. Thomas peered over the fence to see Karen positioning a large outdoor speaker system on her patio directly facing their yard. "New sound system," Thomas called, trying to keep his tone neutral. Karen smiled sweetly. "For my morning exercise class, I've decided to become the wellness coach for the neighborhood ladies. We start tomorrow at 5 a.m. I hope the noise won't bother you." Before Thomas could respond, a certified letter arrived from Karen's attorney demanding $27,500 for immediate remediation of the encroachment, or threatening to seek an injunction forcing removal of the entire pool deck. "She's trying to bankrupt us," Sarah said that night as they calculated their savings against mounting legal fees. "First the complaints, then the security cameras we had to install, and now this lawsuit." Max appeared in the doorway of their bedroom, clutching his teddy bear. "Dad, why is the angry lady playing music? I can't sleep." From outside came the pounding bass of workout music, despite the fact that it was nearly 11 p.m. When Thomas called the non-emergency police line, he was told they'd send someone when available, but noise complaints were low priority. The next morning, true to her word, Karen began her exercise class at precisely 5 a.m. Through bleary eyes, Thomas watched from their bedroom window as Karen, alone in her yard except for her portable speaker, performed exaggerated jumping jacks while staring directly at the Walsh house. The property line dispute had evolved from a legal nuisance into psychological warfare. August brought a punishing heat wave to the neighborhood, with temperatures soaring above 95 degrees for 6 consecutive days. Under normal circumstances, the Walsh pool would have been a sanctuary, but the ongoing legal battle with Karen had cast a shadow over their backyard oasis. Thomas's mother had suffered a mild heart attack earlier that week, prompting an impromptu family trip to visit her at the hospital in a neighboring city. Before leaving, Thomas adjusted the pool chemicals, set the automatic filter system, and double-checked that all security cameras were functioning properly, a routine that had become second nature since Karen's hostilities began. Should we ask someone to check on the house? Sarah wondered as they packed overnight bags into the car. Laylee and Max sat solemnly in the backseat, worried about their grandmother. Thomas glanced at Karen's house, where the blinds moved slightly despite no breeze. I've asked Rebecca from across the street to keep an eye out. Plus, we have the cameras. It's just one night. The family arrived at the hospital to find Thomas's mother in stable condition. The doctors wanted to keep her under observation for at least 48 hours. What was intended as a day trip stretched into an overnight stay at a nearby hotel. That evening, as the Walsh family ate a subdued dinner in the hotel restaurant, Thomas's phone buzzed with a security alert. He excused himself and stepped into the lobby to review the footage, expecting perhaps a raccoon triggering the motion sensors. What he saw made his blood run cold. The night vision camera captured Karen scaling the fence between their properties with surprising agility for a woman her age. She wore dark clothing and carried a large tote bag. After glancing furtively around the yard, she approached the pool's edge and removed several bottles from her bag. Thomas watched in disbelief as Karen methodically uncapped each bottle and poured their contents into his pool. The security lights reflected off the liquid as it spread across the water's surface. Karen's expression was one of grim satisfaction as she emptied the final container, carelessly tossing it onto the pool deck before scrambling back over the fence. "Sarah," Thomas called, his voice tight with controlled fury. "We need to go home. Now." "What's happened?" she asked, alarmed by his expression. Thomas showed her the phone screen. "Karen just poured something into our pool." After arranging for Sarah's parents to stay with his mother, Thomas drove his family home through the darkness, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. They arrived shortly after midnight to find an ominous sight. Under the security lights, their once crystal blue pool had turned a murky brown color, with an oily film floating on the surface. "Don't touch the water," Thomas warned as Max moved toward the edge. "We don't know what she put in there." Early the next morning, the pool maintenance company arrived for an emergency inspection. The technician's expression grew increasingly grim as he tested the water. "I've never seen Fey levels like this," he said, showing Thomas the test strip that had turned an alarming shade of purple. "This isn't just household bleach or something simple. Based on the damage to the liner and the chemical composition, I'd say someone poured industrial-strength drain cleaner or something similar into your water." "Can it be fixed?" Thomas asked, surveying the damage. The technician shook his head. "The liner is completely compromised. See how it's already starting to warp and bubble. And the chemical damage to the filtration system could be extensive. You're looking at a minimum of $12,000 in repairs, possibly more once we drain it and can assess the full damage." Sarah joined them by the pool's edge, her face pale with shock. "Who does something like this?" "Someone who knew exactly what she was doing," Thomas replied grimly, watching as small pieces of the pool liner floated to the surface like dead leaves. "And someone who made sure to wait until we were dealing with a family emergency to do it." As if summoned by their conversation, Karen appeared at her upstairs window, watching their distress with undisguised satisfaction. When she caught Thomas looking, she didn't even bother to retreat from view. Instead, she raised her coffee mug in a mock toast before turning away. Thomas sat in the police station, the USB drive containing the security footage clutched tightly in his hand. Officer Ramirez, a veteran of the local force, reviewed his statement with professional detachment, though her eyebrows rose slightly as Thomas described the extent of the damage. "And you're certain it was your neighbor?" she asked. Thomas nodded grimly. "The cameras caught everything." Her face is clearly visible when she looks up at one point. She knew exactly what she was doing. Officer Ramirez plugged the USB drive into her computer and leaned forward to watch. Thomas had viewed the footage so many times that he could predict each movement. Karen scaling the fence, unpacking the chemicals, pouring them methodically into the pool, her satisfied expression as she watched the water begin to change color. "Well," Officer Ramirez said after the video ended, "this is about as clear-cut as it gets. Criminal trespassing and property damage, minimum. Given the dollar amount of damages, we're looking at felony charges." She printed several forms for Thomas to sign. "We'll need to take formal statements from you and your wife, and we'll be paying Ms. Mitchell a visit today." That afternoon, Thomas watched from his living room window as two police cruisers pulled up in front of Karen's house. The neighborhood had developed an uncanny ability to sense drama. Within minutes, several residents coincidentally emerged to check their mail or water their lawns. Thomas recognized Rebecca from across the street pretending to trim her already immaculate roses while keeping a careful eye on the proceedings. The officers spent nearly 30 minutes inside Karen's house before emerging with Karen herself, hands cuffed behind her back. Her face was flushed with indignation as they guided her to the police car. When she spotted Thomas watching from his window, she unleashed a stream of invective so loud that several neighbors turned in shock. "You'll regret this," she shouted as an officer helped her into the back seat. "Do you know who I am? I have friends in this city. This isn't over." Rebecca abandoned all pretense of gardening and crossed the street to Thomas's front yard. "I just got a neighborhood alert about what happened to your pool. That's absolutely horrible." Thomas sighed, suddenly exhausted by the whole ordeal. "It's been a nightmare, honestly." Rebecca hesitated before adding, "After you mentioned the problems you were having with Karen, I did some digging. This isn't her first rodeo." "What do you mean?" "I'm friends with the HOA president in Oak Ridge Estates. Karen lived there before moving here. She was basically forced to sell after similar disputes with multiple neighbors. Nothing quite as severe as chemicals in a pool, but the same pattern of harassment and legal threats." Word spread quickly throughout the community. By evening, Thomas's phone buzzed constantly with text messages and social media notifications. Other residents began sharing their own encounters with Karen, hostile confrontations over parking spaces, threatening notes left on windshields, peculiar accidents that occurred after disagreements. Most surprising was an email from Karen's former husband who had found Thomas through the neighborhood's social network. "I saw what happened with your pool," he wrote. "Unfortunately, this fits a pattern I'm all too familiar with. If you need a character witness for any legal proceedings, please contact me." The following day, Thomas met with the district attorney assigned to the case. The prosecutor reviewed the evidence with growing interest. "With the video footage and the lab results from your pool water, we have a solid case," she explained. "Ms. Mitchell has been released on bail, but she's been ordered to have no contact with your family. We've also received calls from several other people claiming to be previous victims of similar behavior." "So what happens now?" Thomas asked. "The wheels of justice move slowly, but they do move," the prosecutor replied. "Ms. Mitchell will face criminal charges, but I also recommend pursuing civil action for the damages. Document everything: repair estimates, psychological impact on your children, any financial losses due to time off work. Build your case methodically." As Thomas left the courthouse, he felt a weight lifting. Karen had destroyed his pool, but in doing so, she had finally given him the unambiguous evidence needed to end her campaign of harassment. For the first time in months, he dared to hope that normalcy might eventually return to Willow Lane.